That's
child,
right.
you know?
I think that's beautiful. That's really true. Every kid has a different path, and it's different. It's hard in a different way, I think, for each of them.
But your support and just the support of my church friends in particular got me through some very dark times. And so I encourage people to reach out, be an open book, tell people how you're feeling. Don't keep it to yourself. You know, if you're a mother that has a child with issues that you cannot figure out, start a timeline, write down everything, because when you feel helpless, that gives you something to do, but it also later turns out to be like the thing that doctors need to see. So, but also don't, as a mother, don't beat yourself up. You know, we do what we can do. We are only human. I know that we feel like we're superhuman and that we need to be superhuman. And there are so many moms that are, I swear, superhuman. But we're really just people, right?
It's really true. And I think, I think we can put on the superhuman show for so long and then we break. And so I think that's great advice. I think that's a perfect way to end a Mother's Day show, to remind moms to be honest about how hard it is with each other, because that's where you get the connections and that's where you get the support. That's the lesson of my friendship with Lainey right there in a nutshell. But at any rate, Lainey, thank you so much for being on the show. Let your sister know that she's next. She's going to have to come on the show as well. And I so appreciate you, and I appreciate our audience for joining us tonight and every Sunday night as we meet more everyday Orthodox Christians. We'll see you next week.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
This is Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan Armatas, a live interactive call-in program where your questions about the Orthodox faith are addressed. Father Evan is the priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado. Call in your question at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here now is Father Evan.
Good evening, and Christ is risen. It's nice to be with you and back on the radio after a 2-week absence. Of course, we were not here with you last Sunday. It was Pascha in the Eastern Christian calendar. We use a different calendar than Western Christians, and so our celebration of Easter, or Pascha as we like to call it, occurred last Sunday, which meant I was not on air after Holy Week. And the Sunday prior, which was Palm Sunday, also wasn't on air because we had our services for Holy Week that begin with the bridegroom matins on Sunday evening of Palm Sunday. So 2 Sundays not with you, but back on air tonight. It's May 9th, 2021. I should say, very importantly, it's Mother's Day, and we wish a happy Mother's Day to our moms, our grandmothers, our spiritual mothers, and godmothers. So many incredible women who have nurtured us. I can think several of them myself, my birth mother, my mother-in-law, my grandmothers, my godmother, an abbess that I'm close to, and certainly other quote-unquote mothers in my life who've taught me so much and been an example of faith. So happy Mother's Day. Of course, our own Matushka Trudy, who's working in the studio tonight, away from her family. Happy Mother's Day, Matushka Trudy. I got a quick chance to chat with her as we were getting ready to start the show. You know, as is typical on the Sunday after Pascha, things tend to be a little bit quiet in the Christian world as people are, in a sense, basking in and recovering from the long Lenten journey and Holy Week. But it is the Sunday of Thomas, the Sunday after Pascha, a time in which we consider the events around Christ's resurrection and his appearance to his disciples in the upper room 8 days after his descent from the cross into the tomb and into Hades even, and his destruction of the kingdom of Satan and his overthrowing of death and sin and his glorious resurrection. So it tends to be a Sunday during the year that it's rather quiet in the churches, and hoping it's not too quiet here tonight. If you want to get into the show, we open up with wide open lines, not a huge surprise, but you can get in at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF Radio. Well, the other thing to let you know, and I hope I get this technical information correct, we are live streaming on Facebook at Ancient Faith Radio Live. So if you want to listen to us on Facebook, that's an option for you tonight. And we're going to see about adding that as a regular feature to the show, another way for people to listen in. Of course, if you're listening to the show post-production as a podcast, you can still send in your questions by going to ancientfaith.com, clicking on the live radio button, scrolling down to Orthodoxy Live, and you'll find a microphone button there by the Orthodoxy Live logo. And you can click there and record a question for us, even if you're listening to this show several months or even years from now. You can still use that recording option to get your question in. And, of course, calling in or emailing at ask@ancientfaith.com. Well, a couple of things to just share with you as we closed out our Lenten journey and into Holy Week. Our parish was so very excited to receive 15 of our catechumens through Holy Baptism during Holy Saturday, and they received the Eucharist for the first time at the vigil with us in our sanctuary. That was beautiful. And I know several people keep asking about how it is that we're celebrating two liturgies at our parish. Well, the simple answer to that is we have two priests, and we can use two different altars and two different setups of the altar with a cloth on it called an andemitsion given to us by our bishop. And so we did that on the vigil as well. We had two liturgies. They were simultaneous, one in our gym and one in our main sanctuary. And what a joy it was to welcome those new members into our parish, and even this Sunday, another member into our parish through baptism on the Sunday of Thomas. So been a busy time. We also lost a parishioner during Bright Week. I mention that to you because it's interesting throughout the year. If you celebrate a funeral, obviously the service for the funeral is standardized, but in Bright Week, we don't use the typical funeral service of the church. Rather, it's basically the matins from the Paschal Vigil. So it's a resurrectional service, which is quite unusual and unique. And many of the faithful say, if there's a time of year to pass, it would be during Bright Week, because your service is so bright and so full of hope as we celebrate the resurrection. Because leaving Pascha, the church in a sense celebrates as if it was one day until we reach the Sunday of Thomas, or I should say the eve of the feast of the Sunday of Thomas, 8 days later. So anyway, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live. It's good to be back with you. Lots of things going on both in the parish and in the world of Orthodoxy. If you haven't yet had a chance to pick up the book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. If you're a new listener, check out that resource. You can pick it up at the Ancient Faith store. And then, of course, you also can, if you're unable to access the Ancient Faith store, you can pick it up on other online retailers. You can read between the lines, I guess, there. We have a few recorded questions, and I want to start with one that came in from Annie. So let's take a listen to this question that came from Annie. Again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live. We're streaming to you live here May 9th, 2021. The number to call in, 1-855-237-2346. But let's take a listen to Annie's question, which just came in.
I'd like to hear more about what Orthodoxy says about suicide. We're reaching very dark times in that department. I've talked to many parents who are amazed that their children want to kill themselves and they don't understand where it's come from. I've talked to people who thought they were doing okay and then suddenly they're not. I've talked to people who are abused sexually, who really, that has put them on a very painful, confusing path for the rest of their lives. You can tell it's just completely messed them up. And whenever I've talked to priests about this sort of thing, I'm referred to the story of Judas, who betrayed Christ for money. And whenever they bring up that story, I think to myself, really? Is that all you have to say? The man who betrayed Christ, the Son of God, for money, that's who you're comparing these people to. That's what Orthodoxy has to say about suicide. That's very detached from reality, if that is the only response. Of course, I can see how a betrayal of Christ can be factored into cases of suicide, but I can't take a blanket approach to this. There's individual cases. Maybe it's just getting worse and the church hasn't had to deal with it as much before, but I don't know. This is something that we're going to have to deal with. If you haven't been there, you haven't been there. I've been there. It was so much pain because I couldn't understand what was going on. I was in a lot of pain and there was a lot of manipulation happening that I wasn't aware of. And then when I became aware of it, that kind of made things worse. So there was a lot going on. I think it's easy to say, if you've never been through it, you can blame the person. Not necessarily. It depends, but I don't necessarily blame the person.
Annie, I thank you for calling in with this question. I'm grateful for an opportunity to address this issue of suicide, and really, I think, an appropriate response from the church on it. A couple of things to just throw out as I open up a response to this. First is to let people know, related to teens, faithtree.org. If you go to faithtree.org, they've recently sent out some initiatives related to mental health in teenagers. And they've got some new resource guides and mental health support for teens and young people. So check that out. The other thing that I want to point out is something called OCAMPR. And that acronym, OCAMPR.org, if you go there, OCAMPR is the Orthodox Christian Association for Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. It's pan-Orthodox, and it's a fellowship of caregivers serving caregivers and the general public. And they've also got an initiative for mental health that has been sent out from the bishops to the various parishes, Orthodox parishes throughout the U.S. So a couple of resources there. My own parish has a dedicated ministry for mental health and mental health support called Side by Side. I'm aware of that resource in other parishes as well. And dear caller, I'm extremely disappointed by the response that you have received to equate someone's struggle in a very simplistic way to the biblical story of Judas's betrayal and his own suicide. I think is unfortunate is the softest I could say. But more harsh statement would be, I think it's perhaps even negligence there and dangerous. You know, I think the pastoral office of the church has to work with the theological and dogmatic realities that we have received through divine revelation. And those dogmatic and theological perspectives are never meted out or shared without them going through the pastoral office. We see this very clearly in the ministry of Christ. I mean, it would be a rather lengthy and long response if I were to enumerate and sort of lay out specifically the number of times where Christ responds, not in a dogmatic fashion, but in a pastoral fashion. I mean, everything about his ministry was conditioned through his love and care for fellow human beings, women and men, children, the young and the old alike. And his ministry didn't simply address one aspect of someone's well-being. We know that Christ himself encountered people who struggled with mental illness and physical illness and circumstances that were traumatic and led to what we would today call post-traumatic stress syndrome and the like. And his care and concern was to heal the whole person. And I don't think he ever was, dismissive. He didn't use shorthand when it came to people's needs and problems. And there was always an element of compassion. And so the simple response of, Judas hanged himself and therefore suicide, or someone who has contemplated taking their life, is someone to be dismissed and condemned, to me is, as I said, simplistic, naive, and negligent. We don't look at it that way at all. Rather, what I know to be the pastoral response is one of care and concern, support. We have to design, often in our parishes, real live responses to people's needs. Of course, we execute in the pastoral office a great deal of personal contact and counsel. And we also draw in the resources of professional mental health professionals. We're not at all in opposition to talk therapy and even medicine. Many of the antidepressants and other types of medicines that can help, that psychiatrists and psychologists and primary care physicians and neurologists and the like, we bring in everything to try and address the reconstitution of a human person, And when we are unable to assist in such a manner and suicide does occur, once again, the church's response is pastoral. And let me be direct. The onus of making a pastoral call here on whether or not the church should, for example, conduct a funeral service is really on the idea that one's mental state has to be proven as stable. In other words, some might say, well, if someone commits suicide, then they are, cut off from the life of the church and sacramentally no longer accounted as one of the members of the church. That's an incorrect statement. No, rather, when we look at someone who has taken their life, we understand the tragic nature of that and the pastoral dimension of it. And we don't say, boy, they were in their right mind and they took their life. Rather, we would say we have to prove that they were in their right mind and took their life. And so, for example, my bishop has expressly and directly, told me when someone has taken their life, you will conduct the funeral and you will care for the family, because the church's perspective is, how could they have taken their life if they did not have a host of issues that had come into their lives emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, that led to a tragic decision such as this. And so, that I think should help Annie, to start to quell, and I would say to pastors who want to sort of make something like this so black and white and dismiss the rather nuanced and complicated nature of suicidal ideation, and please reconsider your position, and communities that do the same. Obviously, many initiatives have begun in the church and are growing. The focus on mental health and mental wellness has increased. We're becoming more and more aware, I would say, in our popular parlance, but the church has always been concerned about this. And so anyway, great question, Annie. I hope that helps. Feel free to redirect if you listen to this and you have additional thoughts, and if I haven't quite addressed the question you're asking. Again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio, and the number to call if you'd like to join us tonight is 1-855-237-2346. Now, one of the questions that I tend to get over and over again, I mentioned the one that seems to come up about celebrating two liturgies, but another one is related to infant baptism. And having just celebrated the baptism of an infant this morning after Divine Liturgy, and then also the previous Saturday, on Holy Saturday, one of our callers, John Paul, left me a message and said, "Would you explain the position of the church on infant baptism?" Listen, one way to perhaps address this is to understand that we view the church as the household of God, and we see that within the church, I've answered this question in a number of different ways, but I'm going to use this approach today. And we see within the church is the family of God, you know? And a family is obviously made up of members of different ages and abilities and backgrounds. I mean, it's not monolithic. And so there are infants, there are children, toddlers, teens, young adults, middle age, and the elderly. Every family sees that, you know, or many families see that variety and that reality. And so the church brings in the members of the household of God from the time that they are born, because that's how a family operates, and we don't exclude anyone from the fellowship of the family. Obviously, within the Western church, there developed the idea that baptism should not be offered or celebrated or given, that grace given, until one's intellectual abilities were such that they could comprehend or understand a life of faith. To my mind, that's problematic in some ways because, you know, I'm 52, and how well can I say I understand the mysteries of God? You know, that in baptism, I participate in the death, this is Romans 6, of Christ, or that in baptism I participate in the resurrection of Christ, again, Romans 6, or John 3, you know, that one is born from above through water and the Spirit. That's what Christ tells Nicodemus. Or Paul's understanding of regeneration and renewal, you know, even to the language of the putting on of Christ, the death of the old man, Adam, and the birth of the new man. These are concepts even Nicodemus, when he's consulting with Jesus, is confused, and he says, you know, can a man enter again into his mother's womb? You know, when we talk about being born anew or born above or born again, and he's confused, you know. So to reduce baptism to some sort of intellectual set of ideas or refrain from baptism until, the proper intellectual framework can be put around it. It is a little bit difficult from my perspective, and especially when we consider that within the New Testament, as Paul compares baptism to circumcision, which occurred on the 8th day in Israel, someone didn't know that they were being circumcised at 8 days old, and yet that was how they were enrolled in Israel. And baptism is now the circumcision of the heart, not of the flesh, and we can be enrolled into the household of God as early as 8 days, certainly, and even before that. Many people even get baptized later. I baptized a couple of people in their 60s this past Saturday. So, one's birth in Christ through baptism, and whether or not we would refrain from baptizing infants, doesn't square up with, obviously, the understanding we have of the church. It doesn't square up with the idea of intellectual capacity. We don't find that in Scripture, and it doesn't square up with the tradition of Israel, which the church built itself upon as the new Israel. And we certainly see also in the New Testament that people were being baptized as part of households. We see that in Acts, for example. And, so these are some things to think about. Now, of course, we can parse and we can proof text and we can sort of argue. But one thing that I would put forward is that infant baptism was something that was practiced in the early church from the time of the apostolic period. And no one had any qualms about it at all. And it's not until much later that the idea that one would be baptized at the age of reason, or perhaps baptized as an infant but not confirmed, till the age of reason. But separating baptism from chrismation is also problematic, because as Christ descends into the river Jordan and as he comes out of it, it says immediately the Spirit descended. And when the apostles encounter those who have been baptized but not confirmed, they immediately call down the Holy Spirit upon them. So confirming or calling down and offering the gift of the Holy Spirit at a latter time after one's baptism, again, doesn't make sense. It doesn't square up with the Scriptures in any way. So, John Paul, thanks for that question. Let's take a quick break, and we're going to come back. Again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here in Ancient Faith. It's May 9th, 2021, Mother's Day and the Sunday of Thomas, and we'll catch you in just about 20 seconds.
Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan will be back in a moment. In the meantime, lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346.
Hi, this is Father Evan Armatas, priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado, and the host of the Ancient Faith Radio Sunday night call-in show, Orthodoxy Live. I am pleased to announce today the release of my first book for Ancient Faith Publishing, titled Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. It seeks to provide a guide to the three basic and primary disciplines of Orthodox spirituality. Through these disciplines, Christ opened for us a path that frees us from the disordered way of life that has become normal for many, even though their hearts and minds tell them otherwise. Please join me in exploring the three-legged stool of Orthodox spiritual practice: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Books now available at store.ancientfaith.com. And the title, once again, is Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. I look forward to sharing it with you. God bless.
Father Evan is ready for your call, and our lines are open at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Evan.
Well, hello again. Again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here in Ancient Faith Radio, and I want to take another listen to another question that came in This one from Amy. So let's take a listen to this question.
My name is Amy, and my question is, why do so many Orthodox Christians have an obsession with martyrdom? I'm obviously not a charismated Orthodox Christian, although I've been told by a priest that I'm already Orthodox, so I don't know how this whole thing works. I'm just starting to learn about it. But the fascination with Orthodoxy for me has been the saints, but I've arrived at my interest from other means, not just research. But one thing I do continually bump into, especially online, are these people who comment on blogs and who I chat with, who seem to just be so obsessed with being a martyr. And the disconcerting thing to me is that they're praising the martyrs for the wrong reasons. They're praising the martyrs for their long suffering. Now, it doesn't seem right to me that we should really desire much of anything. I mean, I'm talking about these deep life desires. Like if you're really living in step with the divine, that's all you concern yourself with, martyr or not a martyr. And obviously by martyr, I mean someone who endures extraordinary amount of pain to the point of probably becoming a saint. There are plenty of people around the world who endure terrible pain who are never crowned a saint. So the real thing to me is, what is this obsession, this unhealthy obsession with? I wish I could be like Saint, who was it who married the wife beater? I can't remember her name. Timaeus of Lesbos, I think. Oh, I really wish, that's who I want to be. It just seems terrible. It seems like a terrible, terrible thing that people are completely misunderstanding the point of these stories of the saints. And, it's like, really? You want to marry someone who beats you and then have a child with that person and raise your child in that environment? That's your idea of what holiness is? Like, you missed the entire point of the story. You missed the enduring in spite of something. I want to endure something so bad. Why? It's this weird pride that makes itself out to be humble, and I wonder what you have to say about that, because it's one of the most off-putting things I have found about people who are interested in Orthodoxy. It, to me, is completely missing the point of any of these stories, and really has nothing to do with being spiritual.
Well, thanks for the question. I can't say that I have run into the same issue in the way that you're describing it, where it sort of seems like everywhere you turn, you're finding people obsessed with the idea of martyrdom. I am suspicious of the online bloggers and Orthodox posters. It's a world that I stay away from. And I haven't seen a lot. I mean, there are good things out there from people's blogs and posts online about Orthodoxy, but I do see and do hear of, and it's often shared with me, a lot of disfigured opinion and sort of spiritual contemplation that masquerades as something good and healthy and is disfigured. And I think that's what, to a large measure of what, you're describing. The church stated very clearly early on that seeking martyrdom, seeking, persecution, and putting oneself in harm's way was heretical in a sense. That if someone was to do such a thing, they were not living in the church or within the teachings of the gospel. This is not healthy, and we don't seek martyrdom. We don't seek an abuse, a situation that's full of abuse. We don't look to put ourselves in the path of a runaway train. Those ideas, I would agree with you 110%, seem to miss the point completely. The gospel, the path of Christ is a path that he himself says requires us to take up the cross, okay? And, a death to self, and, such a path is narrow and it's not easy, but we take it up with joy, and we do it in an imitation of Christ, but it's not self-flagellation. It's not self-denial for self-denial's sake. Rather, it is always pointed outward. And so the way you're describing some people's obsession with martyrdom, it's pointed inward, and that's disfiguring. The martyrs in their martyrdom are serving others, and that other could be Christ, but it is often also a family member, a relative, or their community. And so when we think about our own walk in Christ and our own path of the cross, we take it up willingly. We don't, this can seem nuanced. It's not like we're putting ourselves in harm's way, but we might say, I'm going to do with less so that I might give to those who have less. That's a type of martyrdom, right? But we wouldn't seek out a spouse who's mentally unstable and hope that they would beat us so that we can attain some sort of martyrdom. Now, if our situation is such where, we suffer because of an illness or a financial hardship, or we might have members in our family who are unwell, and we bear up under those difficult circumstances with virtue, yes, that is a type of martyrdom, but we didn't go seeking it. I know of many parents whose children are not well, and their care for them is a type of martyrdom. But there's also plenty of people whose children are fine, and they have good jobs, and they have good marriages, and yet it's a struggle, and they choose to struggle with virtue, which is a type of martyrdom. And they serve others and deny themselves, which is a type of martyrdom. Perhaps what gets lost here is that martyrdom, a martyria, is a witness. So the type of witness that we are looking for is a witness that points to the path of Christ and the way that we live our life to imitate what he taught and what he did, so that others might come to the knowledge of the truth. And really, not so that our lives would be full of doom and gloom, but as Jesus said, I came to give life and give it abundantly. And the path of martyrdom is a path of freedom. It's a path of joy. It's counterintuitive perhaps at first, but to give up my own desires actually is liberating. And it leads to a life not of pain and sorrow, but one of joy, one of generosity and gratitude. So, I just think that, I don't run into this a lot. I do know what it is that you're talking about. I agree with you. I think it's disfigured. I'm not sure that, what people are posting or the direction they're taking sounds like it's the right path they should be taking. And I would just caution you to perhaps avoid such online forums. And if you're part of those groups that post quite a bit about, the desire for martyrdom or whatever, maybe rethink your position, So anyway, looks like we have a caller. I don't see the caller on the VX, so let's just welcome in our caller. So welcome to Orthodoxy Live. Hello.
Hello, Father Evan.
Hi, tell me your name.
Hi, my name is TJ. How are you tonight?
Good, TJ. I apologize. I don't have my producer is unable to post calls, and so she had to text me and say, "Hey, we've got a caller," and you're probably not seeing it. So, TJ, is your name short for Thomas Jefferson or
no? Actually,
Thomas
Theodore
J?
James.
Theodore James, but you.
Yeah. So my dad went by Ted, and my parents didn't want to call me Teddy when I was little. I'm a junior, so
I gotcha.
So they named me TJ. Yes.
Well, my cousins all went to TJ High School, which was Thomas Jefferson High School. So I was thinking of that. So, well, Christ is risen. Welcome to the show.
Truly is risen. How are you tonight?
Good. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from I'm calling from Illinois. So I live in Geneva, Illinois, which is about 48 miles west of Chicago. So,
I was out in Chicago a few weeks ago during Lent, and I didn't know this. I just always thought people were talking in a strange way. Chicagoland. Is that why do they call it Chicagoland? I don't get that.
It has something to do with what I think it might have been. It might have been like Robert McCormick, who was the editor and publisher of the Chicago Tribune for a lot of years. I believe he coined that phrase, Chicagoland. Really? As a way of speaking of the whole area. Yeah.
Huh. So it includes the environs, like suburbs and surrounding townships?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So are you in Chicagoland?
I guess I'm basically on the very outskirts of Chicagoland.
There you go. That's funny. Well, welcome to the program. What's your question?
Well, thank you. Well, I actually thought about it. I think I called you up probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been attending an Orthodox church for the last 5 years, and I had been attending a Baptist church before that, and kind of became disillusioned with that. So I kind of stopped going to the church for a while, and started to do some exploration. So I found Orthodoxy, and I found it's very interesting. I found Father Peter Gilquist's book. Becoming Orthodox. And this is interesting. So, and ended up finding an Orthodox church that it's an Antiochian Orthodox church, and the pastor there has a similar story to Father Gilquist. So,
oh really?
Yeah. Anyways, so I attended for a while, and then I talked to my wife about it, and I said, hey, why don't you come with me to this church and check it out? So she came a couple times, and she just was like, this is not
no way. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, I kept attending. She kept going to the Baptist church. And just over the years here, it's gotten more and more difficult as time has gone on with me. As far as going to the Orthodox church, attending it, and my wife just can't see what I see in the church. The first time I brought her to the church, there was a baptism there, and she thought it was child abuse, the way that the child got immersed in water. Which was interesting because I did Mother's Day. I went to the Baptist church with her today, and they had a dedication, which was of 2 separate children, but they gave their explanation of dedication, and I thought this is kind of a double thing that he's talking about here, where we're first going to dedicate it, and then the child's going to make a decision, and then we'll baptize him. So, but anyways, I just, I haven't become a catechumen because my priest has said to me, basically he wanted to kind of see if I could bring my wife along, and when that wasn't a possibility really that we talked about, then it was, well, I'd like to at least talk to your wife about you becoming a catechumen, and just explain to her what's happening. And now he came. My pastor is a convert too. He was actually a pastor of a Baptist church in the area for about 20 years. And when he retired, a group of congregants from his church asked him if they were kind of looking for something else. And so this is why I was talking about kind of similar to Father Gilquist. He pastored them on through to finding Orthodoxy. So. Wow. Anyways, but just in the last, since about Christmas time, it's just gotten really tough for me at home. My home life is really, it's very hard. She tells me that Sunday is the loneliest day for her, and she doesn't like the fact that I go to a church. She goes to a separate church. She's by herself. and of course, I've responded a couple times, and I've said to her, well, we could go to church together if you're interested in going to the Orthodox Church. And I say that half kiddingly, but I know that that doesn't seem to be in the cards. But it's just really getting hard for me. So I'm wondering, do I continue on down this path in Orthodoxy, and I'll tell you, I've told her too. I said I cannot. And I was raised Roman Catholic too, so I mean, it was like I've been to the Roman Catholic Church. I've done the Protestant thing, and I think that the Orthodox Church is the true church, and I just can't see myself going anywhere else. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know any advice you could give me or whatever. I just don't know what to do. Is it time to just kind of concede and go, okay, let's find a church? Because that's her big thing. She always says to me, well, we need to find a church together. You found the Orthodox Church by yourself. And let's go find a church together. And I like I said, it's just the Orthodox Church is, to me, it's the church. It is the true apostolic church at this point. So
let me ask you, TJ, do you have children?
Yeah, we do. I have a son who's 23. He's going to be finishing up college here in a little bit. I have a son who's 19, and he's actually in the Marine Corps right now, so he's not not at home. And then I have a daughter who's 17, and she's a junior in high school. So
yeah. So the children are older, and do the one that's at home, does she attend with mom, or what does she do?
Yeah, she goes to church with mom because she's come to my church a couple times, and she doesn't like it. So yeah, she doesn't care for it either, and I can never tell if that's because mom doesn't like it or she just doesn't like it. So
sure, yeah. You're asking not a theological question; you're asking a pastoral question, right? And it's a question that others have asked in the past, and I just want to say from the outset, I thank you for asking such an intimate question. It's not an easy question to ask on air, and it's not an easy situation, obviously, and I can see that. And so, what I would say to you is the solution to me lies in some sort of pastoral solution, not a theological solution.
Right.
So what I'm saying is I think everything on the table related to, hey, let's parse this out. Let's see what the Bible says about this or that. I think none of those things really are on the table. Because that's not the situation that you face, where we might say in some situations, I've had, let's say families who someone says, well, look, theologically speaking, I just disagree. I don't think, and then we can sit down, right? So, your situation's pastoral. So I think the solution has to be pastoral. And so what can that look like? And I think here, the rule of mercy and not of exactness should be followed. And so I'm going to just kind of float a scenario. So I could see a scenario where we would say, okay, so TJ is going to enter the church and he's going to become a sacramental member. But we know that, twice a month he's going to go with his wife to church and he's going to be with her. And then on those weeks, perhaps he comes to a weekday service instead so that he can be with his wife. And that's the type of solution I think you have to find. And I think, I don't know if your priest is open to that dialogue and amenable, but I think that's the dialogue that you've got to have. It's like, look, I'm going to enter the church, but I've got to care for and tend to my relationship with my wife. And I've got to find a way to support her and make her feel as if she's not being abandoned and, being left alone.
Right.
Is that tenable? Is that possible?
I think it is. One of the things that my pastor had an experience some years ago where he had somebody who came, similar situation. The wife came, the husband came. They were from an Episcopal background. The husband said, I'm not really into this. The wife kept going. She ended up getting chrismated and it was active in the church, and then all of a sudden just kind of disappeared. And she was very, she was very active. And we have a rather small congregation. It's not we probably have maybe 35 to 40 people at a Divine Liturgy on Sundays.
Yeah.
But she got very active and got very involved, and then all of a sudden just disappeared. And it turned out that the husband kind of put his foot down and said, "No more of this. You're either come to church with me or not." So my pastor is somewhat hesitant about that.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So, and I understand it too. And we have a very good relationship. I talk to him a lot. We have good conversations, and but that seems to be his holdup, is that he's not quite sure if he wants to do that again. Now, I've never pushed him on the issue whether he would or not, and I haven't talked to him. Maybe it's time to have that conversation with him and just.
I think it is. I think it is, and I mean, here's the reality. You've been attending there for 5 years.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you say your wife's saying you can't become Orthodox. I heard what you said was she feels alone.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, is there a scenario, and, can you talk to her about it too and say, well, if I was to become Orthodox and I was to attend on my own, a couple of times a month and the other times I would be with you, is that a doable scenario? Yeah. Would you be okay with that, sweetheart? And see. Because I think, again, a path of peace, a path where you can support her, but, at the same time, you can grow spiritually speaking, it should lead to you being a better husband. Your life in the church should lead to you being a better father. And, that should be, demonstrable. I mean, that's something you should be able to demonstrate. And I think, how do you cut off that longing to be in the church? I don't know how you do it. Now, if your kids are a little younger, I would say, boy, maybe a little more caution is needed. But your children are adults. And
basically.
And at this point, you're not, you've got one still in the home that she's going to be there about, another year?
Yeah. Yeah, about a year and a half.
Yeah, and then she's going to be off into her adult life, and I think, again, if your children were younger, it would kind of change the calculus, as they say. But I have similar situations in my parish, and I've just always found that there's usually a solution that the spouse who doesn't want to enter the church can feel comfortable with, and I can understand your pastor's hesitation, having gone through an experience where someone was basically told they couldn't attend any longer, and then they left the church. But here's one of the things that I would, I say this to you that you can pray about and maybe lift up to your pastor to pray about as well. I have given up on the idea that I can predict what's going to happen. Okay. And here's what I mean specifically. I've had people that have come to St. Spiridon's and who have gone to every service. They've gotten involved in ministry. They've read every book. They've met with me. They, taken the intro class. On and on and on. And they get to a point where they're ready to be baptized. They're baptized, and then whoosh, never see them again, right? Yeah. And then the opposite, someone who walks in the door, doesn't seem all that connected, but persists in their desire to be baptized, and they've become integral to the life in the community, right? Mm-hmm. And I used to think that I could predict and I could influence. And I've realized that my job's a little bit different. My job is to facilitate. And if someone tells me, my bishop told me this once, because, someone had said to the bishop, well, someone should go through a long period of learning and as a catechumen. And my bishop said, look, if they can recite the creed, and if they look me in the eye and say, I want this, why am I hesitating? You're an adult man, and your desire to enter the church is clear. So can I predict what's going to happen 3, 5, 6, 10 years from now, whether or not you'll be a faithful member of the church? I can't. And here's where it gets a little bit, I would even say, scandalous. If you and your wife were both Orthodox, okay, let's say you were both culturally Orthodox, you were Russian.
Okay. Yeah. Right,
and
okay.
your children, are born, and you're nominal in your adherence to the life of the church, right? And you show up to have your child baptized. We baptize the child, and then we see you twice a year. And no one blinks an eye. And so here you are, persistent and desirous of, and I just think that, the pastoral dimension has to be handled, but I don't think there's a theological or a canonical reason why the church wouldn't baptize and admit you into the sacraments of the church. And I would say that the grace of those sacraments will probably further heal your relationship and your family. I mean, not like magic, but I think as you faithfully adhere to a rhythm of receiving the sacraments, it would help in your life at home. And so that's the path I'd go down, TJ. And any follow up?
No, I think that's a sound way of going about it at this point in time. I'll pursue that. I'll talk to my pastor and see, and I'll have to have a conversation with my wife then and see what if she's amenable to that or not. So I do go to I have to say it's kind of good having the Easter celebrations apart, because I did go to the Easter sunrise service at her church, and like I said, I was in church. I went there for Mother's Day today, but I have that feeling is that. I forget which Callistos Ware book it is, but in the preface he talks about a Russian, I don't remember, it was a Russian bishop who gets invited to a Protestant service, and at the end of it somebody asked him how it was. He said, well, it was a nice concert and a good lecture. So that was a bit of my feeling today from having gone to the Orthodox Church.
Once we get into the liturgical framework, it's hard to do the other. But, I think, again, why couldn't you find a solution that would work? I think you can, and
I know she did ask me too. She said to me, "I haven't seen you in where have you been at night all this time?" I said, "I told you it was our Holy Week this week." I mean, I was going to services, so she wasn't too crazy about that either. But that was probably a lack of communication on my part that caused that issue. So I don't think I told her it was Holy Week, but I don't think she understood what that meant as far as Orthodox goes.
Well, and just in a relational context, you might find the work of John Gottman and how he instructs couples go through conflict helpful, because again, it's not that you conflict over where to go to church. It's probably more to do with how you go through that conflict that causes, either a level of anxiety or fear or feeling of abandonment for her. So if you can improve on that mechanics of how you do the conflict, it probably would make the journey in a lot easier. But TJ, thanks for calling. Sure. Sorry it's been so long since you called.
You said that's okay. You said John Gottman. Is that Gottman?
Yeah, Gottman. I think all of his work's great, but check out his stuff. I think you'll really find it helpful, especially some of his books. He's, the 7 Principles of Marriage and things like that. So check it out. I think you'll really like it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You bet.
One last thing too. I just have to say that you've been great. I found Ancient Faith Radio shortly after I started attending the church, and if I don't listen to you on Sunday evening, I listen to you in the podcast that week. And
thanks,
TJ. That Sunday when I tune in at 7:00 that fifth Sunday, and I go, oh, he's not on this week.
Yeah, that's sweet. Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
Well, God bless.
I appreciate it.
Good night. Well, again, you've been listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith. Glad you were with us. We'll be back next week. We wish you all a happy Mother's Day and, of course, a beautiful Paschal season. Want to thank Matushka Trudy and all of the staff at Ancient Faith for putting on tonight's show and all the wonderful work they do. If you haven't yet picked it up, make sure and do so. Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. I think you'll really enjoy the work, and it'll help you in your life with Christ. For Orthodoxy Live and Ancient Faith Radio, I'm Father Evan. Good night, and God bless.